The air in the Vatican courtyard hung heavy that morning, an air that even sunlight dared not yet pierce. Within that ancient stone embrace, life stirred where it was least expected. A stray dog, thin to the bone and trembling beneath the weight of centuries-old marble columns, had made a quiet refuge here. No one had spoken of it, not openly. Yet for days, the creature had wandered these sacred grounds, as if seeking not food alone, but something deeper. Shelter from a world quick to discard what it does not understand. But not all eyes saw a soul worth sparing. Word had reached Monsignor Battista, an old guardian of tradition, whose heart beat for order above grace. His command was swift, cold, unquestioned: the animal was to be removed. The guards obeyed. Boots echoed across the stones, leashes prepared, poles readied. And in the small crowd of early pilgrims and staff who watched in uneasy silence, none spoke, none intervened. The rhythms of protocol were in motion. Until they weren't. A shadow lengthened across the courtyard, slow, deliberate, sovereign. Pope Leo XIV was approaching. His gaze was steady, unreadable, a tide neither advancing nor retreating. Guards froze mid-step. Battista's voice rang out, a brittle echo in the widening hush: "Holy Father, this creature does not belong here." And as hands reached once more toward fur and bone, Pope Leo raised his hand, not in blessing, but in command. Stillness fell. Even the pigeons ceased their restless wings. What would follow in that next breath would not merely decide the fate of one trembling animal. It would become a lesson, etched into the conscience of a watching church. For when Vatican guards sought to enforce policy before the eyes of Pope Leo XIV, they believed they upheld the letter of the law. But the words that soon passed from his lips would remind them, and the world, that the Spirit of mercy speaks a language far older than law. Before we begin, where are you watching from today? Pope Leo XIV was not a man easily measured by rank or ritual. Though he now bore the weight of the fisherman's ring and walked beneath the vault of St. Peter's, his soul had been shaped far from marble halls and crimson robes. Born Robert Francis Prevost, the son of a seamstress who mended torn garments for the priests of a small parish, he had known poverty more intimately than privilege. His mother had taught him that the worth of a creature, man or beast, was never found in its station, but in its breath. As a child, he had often been found beneath the old fig tree behind their rented rooms, cradling wounded birds or stray cats with a reverence that even the parish priests had quietly admired. Such lessons had not faded with elevation. If anything, the greater his office, the deeper grew his conviction that the Church's true authority was not measured by grandeur, but by its mercy. Yet not all who served within these walls shared that creed. Monsignor Battista, the prefect of internal order, was a man cast from older stone, a guardian of decorum, unmoved by sentiment. To him, the Vatican grounds were sacred precisely because they remained untouched by the common and the profane. A stray animal within these precincts was not an object of compassion, but a blemish upon the sanctity of tradition. The guards who served beneath him were dutiful, if not zealous. Bound more to the discipline of command than to the whispers of conscience, they followed orders without inquiry. On this morning, their task seemed simple enough: restore order. Remove the animal. Cleanse the scene before pilgrims and press alike could take note. But already, they had been noticed. Tourists with cameras lingered behind the cordon, lenses raised with a hunger for the unscripted. A handful of journalists, always alert for signs of division within the Church, exchanged murmured predictions. And at the heart of it all, in that widening circle of tension, stood the frail dog, ribs showing through matted fur, eyes wide with an ancient fear. This moment mattered because it would not pass unseen. The world had grown accustomed to the unexpected from Pope Leo XIV, his unguarded visits to hospitals, his refusal of papal apartments, his embrace of the poor. Yet even his closest aides could not predict whether he would, in this instant, uphold the dignity of tradition, or break it once more upon the altar of compassion. The cameras clicked. The guards tensed. Battista's jaw tightened. And Pope Leo XIV stood in the center of it all, unmoving, unreadable, his outstretched hand halting both action and breath. If this story already stirs something within you, do not watch in silence. Subscribe to God's message for souls. Not for spectacle, but for awakenings of the heart. And if you will not, write below, what is it about this kind of mercy that unsettles you? Monsignor Batista's steps broke the frozen moment with sharp precision. His polished shoes clicked against the ancient stones as he advanced toward the pontiff, his posture steeped in deference, yet girded with the unyielding armor of conviction. Holy Father, he began, his voice low but carrying the clipped authority of a man well versed in command, this is a stray. It cannot remain within the Vatican grounds. The guards, sensing their cue, tightened their grips. One hand hovered near the pole, another reached slowly for the frayed leash. The dog shivered beneath the growing circle of scrutiny, its small ribs rising and falling in desperate rhythm. The Pope's gaze remained upon the creature. Not as a judge appraising a trespasser, but as a shepherd beholding one more lost sheep. His voice, when it came, was soft yet resonant, cutting through the tension with a blade of compassion. And who among us, he asked, is not a stray seeking shelter? A breathless pause followed. The courtyard seemed to tilt, as if drawn toward this unexpected gravity. Batista's brow furrowed. He took another step forward, the fabric of his cassock whispering against itself. His words were carefully chosen, wrapped in the velvet of formality yet hard beneath the surface. Your Holiness, I do not question your heart, he replied. But the integrity of this place must be maintained. If we allow sentiment to guide us here, what message do we send to the world? The apostolic palace is not a refuge for the beasts of the street. The Pope turned to him fully now, eyes steady, the faintest trace of a smile. Not of amusement, but of recognition, as though he had long known this argument and pitied its bearer. Protocol, he said, voice warm as candlelight, is meant to serve life, not suffocate it. The words hung in the air, simple yet seismic. Around them, the onlookers, guards, staff, pilgrims, press, stood caught between two worlds, the weight of tradition and the pull of conscience. Batista opened his mouth to speak again, but found no ready retort. The first fissure had formed. Each calm reply from the pontiff was not merely an answer, it was a gentle hammer striking the brittle walls of a mindset long calcified. And so the silence deepened, not with peace, but with the quiet cracking of certainty. If your heart leans toward mercy over law, then let it be known, subscribe to God's message for souls, not for words alone, but for the spirit that moves within them. And if you still will not, then write below. What fears hold you back from embracing a church that bends toward compassion? Batista's hands, clasped behind his back with the discipline of decades, tightened ever so slightly, an unconscious tremor betraying what his voice still sought to conceal, the stirrings of doubt, and the deeper stirrings of frustration. He stepped closer, daring now to let decorum yield to something sharper. His tone darkened, not disrespectful, but bolder than before. Are we to make this a zoo, Holy Father? He asked, each word carefully measured, but laced with quiet indignation. The world watches us. Every gesture is interpreted. Every silence, weighed. If we reduce this place to sentiment, what message are we sending to those who seek holiness, not spectacle? The Pope turned toward him, fully, slowly, his gaze not defensive but contemplative. He did not speak immediately. Instead, he let the question settle, let it find its own weight, like a stone cast into still water. And then, with a voice that carried no anger, only the ache of remembered things, he replied. Then let the world see compassion, he said, instead of cold stone. A hush followed. It was not silence, but something richer, an atmosphere changed. The kind of hush that comes not from lack of words, but the recognition that truth has just brushed past the skin. Pope Leo's eyes did not drift from Batista, but his voice turned inward, as if speaking now across time, not just across space. There was a dog once, he said, half dead from hunger. It had been beaten, abandoned. I found it behind the sacristy of our parish church, huddled beneath a bench. My mother wanted me to leave it. We had nothing, not enough food for ourselves, let alone for strays. But something in me could not walk away. He paused. A single breath, drawn slowly. I fed it what I could. Washed its wounds with water and soap. It slept beside me that night, under the altar steps. The next morning, it followed me to morning mass and never left. His voice grew quieter now, as though threading a memory too sacred for full volume. It died years later, old, blind, and warm. In those years, I learned more about loyalty, about silent prayer, about unconditional love, than I ever did from a homily. That creature taught me the value of what the world forgets to see. A murmur moved through the gathered crowd. Tourists leaned in. A journalist lowered his camera, struck not by spectacle, but by the weight of the moment. Batista's mouth drew tight, as if grasping for rebuttal, yet finding no ground beneath him. And then the Pope said it, gently, yet with the clarity of thunder after still skies. Politics divides. The gospel unites, even the lowliest creature among us. The courtyard breathed differently now. The tension did not dissipate, but transformed into a sacred discomfort, the kind that makes the heart listen before it speaks. If your spirit recognizes the truth hidden in tenderness, then bear witness, subscribe to God's message for souls, not for stories, but for the stirrings they awaken. And if you still will not, then speak below, what part of this quiet mercy makes you shift in your seat? Batista's breath grew short, as though each word he had heard carved some unspoken fracture into the armor of his certainty. But desperation sharpens the tongue when the heart cannot yield. He drew himself tall once more, voice tightening into a sharper line. Are you now making decrees based on sentiment, not scripture? He asked, tone a blade wrapped in velvet. Are you bending doctrine, for feelings? There it was, plain, pointed, public. The words landed with an audible weight, their echo stretching into the expectant hush of the courtyard. Cameras tilted forward. Pilgrims stood still, breaths caught. Even the guards, until then a portrait of obedient readiness, seemed caught in the gravity of the moment. For an instant, Pope Leo XIV did not reply. He simply looked, not at Batista, nor at the watching crowd, but at the trembling dog that lay before them all. And then, with movements both deliberate and impossibly tender, the Vicar of Christ stepped forward. The white of his robe swayed like slow clouds in the morning air, trailing across stone worn smooth by centuries of human longing. Each footfall was a rebuke to haste, a sermon to the senses. Then, he knelt. There was no flourish, no ceremony, only a man in white, robes brushing the dust of earth, bowing beside a creature the world had deemed unworthy. One hand reached out, not as ruler to subject, but as brother to brother. Fingers worn by prayer touched the animal's matted fur, not with caution, but with the reverence reserved for holy things. And then, the words. His voice did not rise, yet it filled every corner of that space. You call it naive, to protect the innocent, he asked, not to Batista alone, but to every heart watching. I call it sacred. A pause so deep followed that even the softest wind seemed unwilling to intrude. Journalists lowered their cameras, almost ashamed to capture what belonged first to the soul. Tourists forgot their whispered speculations. Even Batista's next breath caught somewhere between defiance and awakening. Pope Leo's hand remained on the trembling creature, steady and sure. And in that one image, a pope kneeling not before kings nor councils, but before a helpless life, doctrine met its living heart. If this moment stirs something in you deeper than doctrine, if it awakens a longing for a church that bends first toward the lowliest, then do not pass by in silence. Subscribe to God's message for souls, not for stories, but for awakenings. And if you will not, then write below. What is it about such sacred mercy that you still resist? Pope Leo XIV rose slowly from the earth, his knees brushing against the worn stone as he stood, not with the stiffness of age, but with the gravity of one bearing witness. His hand lingered a moment longer on the dog's head, then gently released it, as if entrusting the creature now to the weight of what had been spoken. He faced Battista directly. But his voice, when it returned, was not angry. It did not rise. It deepened. "You confuse order with righteousness," he said. "You confuse discipline with love." The words landed with a precision that stripped away pretense. They did not need volume, they carried truth. Battista blinked, as if the sentence itself had caught him off guard. For a man who had spent his life parsing canon law and perfecting ceremonial posture, the accusation was not vulgar, it was devastating. The Pope stepped closer, not in confrontation, but in clarity. "I have read the statutes," he continued, "the rubrics, the boundaries of tradition. And I honor them. But tradition is not our master, it is our servant. And if it fails to make room for mercy, then it has forgotten the one it was built to honor." His eyes swept the crowd now, those behind cameras, those clutching rosaries, those too stunned to speak. "Let me tell you something I have come to believe with all my soul," he said, slower now, deliberate. "One who cannot be trusted with the small life of a creature, cannot be entrusted with the soul of a man." It was not rhetorical. It was not metaphor. It was judgment, and mercy, spoken in the same breath. Battista stepped back. Just half a pace, but the meaning was unmistakable. His shoulders, once rigid, now seemed unsure what shape to take. The folds of his robe shifted awkwardly as the composure he clung to began to loosen. The courtyard was no longer a place of protocol. It had become a confessional. And the Pope, still speaking, gave no reprieve. Not for condemnation, but for revelation. "Why," he asked, eyes resting again on the Monsignor, "does defending life, be it furred or frail, make you uncomfortable?" There was no reply. Not from Battista. Not from the guards. Not from the dozens watching through their phone screens or the reporters scribbling notes they had not expected to take. Only the sound of wings high above and the dog's shallow breathing remained. In that silence, something shifted. Something broke, but not with violence. With light. If your heart recognizes the dismantling of pride as the beginning of wisdom, then do not turn away. Subscribe to God's message for souls, not to be entertained, but to be awakened. And if you still will not, then write below, what is it about this truth that makes you look away? Pope Leo XIV turned once more toward the trembling creature beside him, and with a voice that bore the full weight of the papal office, not thunderous, but resolute, he spoke. "This dog," he said, "will stay under my care, as a symbol of mercy to all who enter these gates." The words, plain and unembellished, landed like the chime of a distant bell, gentle, but impossible to ignore. A soft ripple moved through the crowd. There was no outburst of applause, only a reverent murmur. Like the stirring of leaves just before rain. A quiet cheer rose from one corner, quickly hushed by the gravity of the moment, but not extinguished. Even those who came only for the spectacle now stood as witnesses to something they could not quite name, but could no longer deny. The Pope rose fully now, the folds of his white garment catching the light as he turned to face the people gathered along the courtyard edge. His arms remained at his sides, no theatrical gestures, no raised hands. It was his presence that spoke now, and his voice that followed with the cadence of a man who had prayed deeply before ever raising his voice in public. "This," he said, his gaze steady, "is not about a dog." The silence that followed was not emptiness, it was anticipation. "This is about what kind of church we wish to be. What kind of world we wish to build. Whether we will be known by the gates we guard, or by the doors we open." A mother in the crowd drew her child closer. A priest lowered his head, not in shame, but in realization. Pope Leo continued, and now his voice deepened with something older than doctrine, older than titles, older even than Rome itself. "We do not need more voices of command," he said. We need more hearts of compassion. Not a louder church. A kinder one. He paused, letting the words echo across the stone. And if mercy toward a creature like this is what scandalizes the world, then let the world be scandalized. The moment did not end with fanfare. It ended with stillness, because stillness is where the deepest truths settle. If this is the kind of world you believe in, then do not let this moment pass without witness. Subscribe to God's message for souls, not for stories, but for awakenings. And if you still will not, then tell us below, what holds you back from joining a movement shaped not by fear, but by mercy? What would you have done if you had stood there that day? Would you have watched from the shadows as law moved to displace life? Would you have raised your voice to defend the old order, or lowered your gaze in uneasy silence? Would you have joined the few who whispered dissent, or the fewer still who whispered prayer? Or would you have knelt, quietly, deliberately, in defense of a life the world had deemed unworthy? There are moments when the true battle is not between men, nor between power and protest, but between the quiet chambers of the heart and the loud demands of pride. That morning, beneath those ancient columns, a choice was laid bare, not for the Pope alone, but for all who watched. For us who watch still. And today, that choice lingers. May we all seek truth with humble hearts, and never mistake applause for anointing. If your heart stirred at this witness of compassion, then take one small step toward that light. Subscribe to God's message for souls, not for stories, but for awakenings. And if you still will not, then speak below, what truth here stirred you the most today? For sometimes, the first mercy we must extend, is honesty with ourselves.